Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blizzard howled like a dying god, tearing at the cloak Julian had stolen from the stables, but the cold was nothing compared to the terrifying heat of the magical signature approaching from behind. He didn't look back. To look back was to acknowledge the monster he had raised. To look back was to accept that his legs were failing, his lungs were burning, and his plan to escape the narrative had failed catastrophically. He scrambled up the icy ridge, the frozen scree slicing his palms, desperate to reach the border of the northern duchy. Just 10 more yards. Just 10 more yards, and he would be out of the villain's territory, fading into the obscurity of a commoner's life. Crack. The sound wasn't the breaking of a branch, but the snapping of the space-time fabric itself. The wind died instantly. The snow stopped mid-fall, suspended in an unnatural, terrifying stasis. Julian froze, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The silence was heavier than the storm. A shadow fell over him, long and stretching across the white expanse, cast by a figure standing atop the ridge he had been trying to climb. "I gave you the library," a voice said, smooth as velvet and cold as the grave. "I gave you the West Wing. I gave you the heads of those who insulted you at the banquet." Julian slowly looked up. Looming above him, silhouetted against the pale moonlight, was Duke Cassian Thorne. His obsidian hair whipped violently in the wind that obeyed only him, and his eyes, those terrible, beautiful crimson eyes that Julian had once described in his thesis as pools of cursed blood, were glowing with a manic, devastating hunger. "And yet," Cassian whispered, stepping off the ledge and floating down to the snow as if gravity were merely a suggestion, "you thought you could leave me?" It hadn't started like this. It had started with a book, a headache, and the realization that Julian Vane was a dead man walking. 3 years ago, Julian had woken up not in his university dorm, but in the body of a third-rate archivist in the imperial palace of the Solari Empire. He knew this world. It was the setting of The Sun's Fall, a dark fantasy web novel he had read obsessively. He also knew his character, Julian Vane, was destined to die in Chapter 5, collateral damage, when the villainous Prince Cassian burned down the royal archives in a fit of rage. To survive, Julian had formulated a simple, logical plan: befriend the villain. At that time, Cassian was not yet the Grand Duke or the tyrant of the North. He was just an 18-year-old boy, cursed with unstable dark magic, locked away in the forgotten spire of the palace by a fearful emperor. He was starving, lonely, and slowly going mad. Julian remembered the first time he had climbed the spiraling stone stairs, holding a tray of warm milk and honey bread. The guards had laughed, letting him pass because they assumed the cursed prince would just kill the spindly archivist. He found Cassian huddled in the corner of a room that smelled of mildew and ozone. The boy was emaciated, his eyes wild and distrustful. "Get out," Cassian had snarled, darkness coiling around his fingers like black smoke. "Or I will tear your soul from your body." "You could," Julian had replied, his voice trembling only slightly as he set the tray down on the floor. "But then you wouldn't get the honey bread. And I brought a first edition of the history of Northern warfare. I heard you like strategy." That was the seed. It was a transactional relationship, or so Julian told himself. He brought food, books, and conversation. Cassian refrained from murdering him. Week by week, the wild beast in the tower began to settle. Julian taught him how to control the surges of his magic using breathing techniques from Earth. He read to him when the headaches from the curse blinded him. He became the only source of warmth in Cassian's frozen world. Julian thought he was changing the plot. He thought he was nurturing a potential hero, steering Cassian away from his destiny as the world-destroying antagonist. He was wrong. He hadn't removed the darkness. He had simply focused it. The shift happened gradually, insidious and unnoticed until it was too late. 2 years into their friendship, the emperor died, by the laws of succession, and through a bloody coup that Julian had conveniently slept through, thanks to a drug Cassian had insisted he drink. Cassian ascended not to the throne, but to the position of Grand Duke, seizing control of the military and the North. He was the power behind the throne, the shadow ruler. Julian, still thinking of himself as a background character, a nobody who had simply survived his death date, packed his bags. The archives were safe. Cashin was powerful. The plot was derailed. It was time for Julian to retire to the countryside and open a bakery. He went to Cashin's study to resign. The room was opulent, draped in black and silver, a stark contrast to the dusty tower they had met in. Cashin sat behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing execution orders. He looked up as Julian entered, his face softening in a way that terrified the generals standing at attention. "Leave us," Cashin commanded. The generals scrambled out like frightened rats. "Cashin," Julian started, clutching his resignation letter. "Now that you are the Duke, and the Empire is stable, I think my work here is done. I have a sick aunt in the south." "You don't have an aunt," Cashin interrupted, not looking up from his papers. Julian paused. "A cousin, then. The point is, I am merely an archivist. You have advisors now. Powerful mages. You don't need me bringing you books anymore." Cashin slowly set down his quill. The silence in the room thickened, taking on a physical weight. He stood up, his tall frame blocking out the light from the window. He moved with a predatory grace, circling the desk until he stood directly in front of Julian. "You think?" Cashin's voice was low, vibrating in Julian's chest. "You think you were just bringing me books?" Well, yes. And companionship." Cashin reached out, his gloved hand cupping Julian's jaw. The leather was cold, but the thumb stroking Julian's cheekbone was impossibly gentle. "You are the only person who looked at me and didn't see a monster. You are the only one who touched me without flinching. You tethered me to this world, Julian." "That's good," Julian stammered, his heart rate spiking. "That means you're healed. You can find a partner now. The Lady Alara from the House of Light, she." The air temperature dropped 20 degrees in a second. The windows frosted over. "Do not," Cashin hissed, his eyes flashing dangerous crimson. "Speak another name in my presence." He stepped closer, invading Julian's personal space, backing him against the heavy oak desk. "You are not leaving. You are not resigning. You are the only thing in this wretched empire that belongs solely to me. I am a person, Cashin, not a book to be collected." Julian argued, trying to push him away. It was like pushing against a marble statue. "You are my soul," Cashin corrected, his tone terrifyingly matter-of-fact. "And a man cannot live without his soul. If you try to leave, I will burn the south to find you. If you hide in the sea, I will boil the oceans. Do you understand?" Julian had nodded, terrified. But he hadn't accepted it. He was a modern man, a transmigrator. He wouldn't be a pet. So he planned. He waited. And tonight, amidst the chaotic celebration of the winter solstice ball, he had run. Back on the snowy ridge, the reality of his failure crashed down on him. Cashin stood before him, the magic swirling around him, melting the snow into slush. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated. He looked like that boy in the tower again, terrified that his only comfort was being taken away. "Why?" Cashin asked, his voice cracking. "Was the cage not gilded enough? Was the silk not soft enough? I killed everyone who threatened you. I rewrote the laws so a commoner could sit at the high table. What more do you want?" "I want freedom, Cashin," Julian shouted, the wind whipping his words away. "I want to be able to go for a walk without 5 shadow guards trailing me. I want to have a conversation that you haven't transcribed. This isn't love. This is possession." Cashin tilted his head, as if trying to decipher a foreign language. He stepped closer, the snow evaporating under his boots. "There is a difference?" "Yes." "No," Cashin said, closing the distance. He reached out and grabbed Julian's wrist. The grip was iron tight. "Not for people like us. Not for monsters. I don't know how to love you softly, Julian. I only know how to consume." Julian tried to pull away, but Cashin yanked him forward, slamming their chests together. The heat radiating from the Duke was intoxicating, smelling of wood smoke and expensive cologne. "You transmigrated, didn't you?" Julian froze. His blood ran cold. "What?" Cashin smirked, a sad, broken expression. "I accessed the forbidden archives of the mental mages. I saw the anomaly in your soul signature. You aren't from here. You know the future. You knew I was the villain. Cashin, you came to me because you feared me." Cashin whispered against Julian's lips, his eyes searching Julian's face for any lie. "You fed me and read to me to save your own skin. You manipulated the monster to survive." Julian's breath hitched. "It started that way. But it changed. I cared for you. I truly did. Did? Cashin's eyes narrowed. I do care for you. Then why leave? Because you're suffocating me. Cashin let out a low, dark laugh. He waved his hand, and black chains materialized from thin air. They weren't metal, they were condensed mana, pulsing with a heartbeat. They wrapped around Julian's ankles and wrists, not tight enough to bruise, but heavy enough to ground him. Better suffocated than gone, Cashin declared. You broke the plot, Julian. You changed the story. And now, you have to live with the ending you wrote. Cashin, please, Julian begged, tears freezing on his lashes. If you take me back now, I will never forgive you. Cashin leaned in, kissing the tear track on Julian's cheek. That is fine. Hate me. Loathe me. Curse my name every morning and every night. Just do it within the walls of my estate. As long as you are looking at me, I don't care what emotion is behind your eyes. He scooped Julian up into his arms, bridal style. Julian struggled, beating his fists against Cashin's broad chest, but it was futile. The Duke began to walk back down the ridge, toward the waiting carriage and the army of shadow knights below. You're a tyrant, Julian sobbed, his resistance crumbling under the sheer weight of Cashin's obsession. I am what you made me, Cashin replied softly, burying his face in the crook of Julian's neck, inhaling deeply as if Julian were oxygen itself. I was a villain destined to destroy the world. You saved the world, Julian. But the price is that you belong to the villain now. The return to the Obsidian Palace was a blur. Julian expected the dungeon. He expected shackles on a cold stone wall. Instead, he was brought to the Duke's private chambers, rooms he had been banned from entering before. They were vast, decorated in deep blues and silvers. A fire roared in the hearth. The bed was large enough for 5 people, draped in furs. Cashin set him down on the mattress. He knelt before Julian, beginning to unlace Julian's wet, frozen boots. The act was so domestic, so subservient, that it jarred against the terrifying display of power on the mountain. Your feet are ice, Cashin murmured, rubbing warmth back into Julian's skin with his hands. You're crazy, Julian whispered, staring at the man kneeling between his legs. You're actually insane. Cashin looked up. The red glow in his eyes had dimmed to a simmering ember. I am sane only when you are here. When you left, the voices came back. The urge to burn the capital was overwhelming. He rested his cheek on Julian's knee. Don't leave me again. Please. I will give you anything. You want a library? I will buy every book in the continent. You want the emperor's crown? I will cut his head off tomorrow. Just stay. Julian looked down at the most powerful man in the empire, begging like a child. He realized then the true extent of the trap he had walked into. He had thought the villain was the danger to the world. But Julian was the trigger. If Julian left, millions would die. Cashin would tear the world apart to find him. Julian sighed, a shuddering, broken sound. He reached down and ran his fingers through Cashin's dark hair. Cashin shuddered at the touch, leaning into it with a desperate whimper. No killing the emperor, Julian said quietly. Cashin looked up, hope dawning on his sharp features. No killing. And I want the chains off. If I stay, I stay. No magic binds. Cashin hesitated. He looked at Julian's wrists, then at the door. It was a battle between his trauma and his devotion. Finally, he nodded. He snapped his fingers, and the weight on Julian's limbs vanished. You stay? Cashin asked. I stay, Julian whispered, resigning himself to his fate. I suppose. Someone has to keep the villain in check. Cashin rose, looming over Julian, casting that familiar shadow. But this time, he didn't look like a captor. He looked like a starving man finally, sitting down to a feast. He pressed Julian back against the pillows, his body heavy and warm, covering Julian completely. Then rule me. Cashin breathed against his mouth, before sealing their pact with a kiss that tasted of obsession, winter, and a love that was far too heavy for anyone's soul to carry. And that is how the nobody captured the villain, only to realize too late that the hunter is often the one who ends up in the trap. If you enjoyed seeing the tyrant of the North fall to his knees for his prisoner, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, is it romantic, or is it a red flag when he burns the world just to keep you warm? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,